Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today into a place that's causing a lot of buzzarania in South Africa.
Yeah, you always see it in those headlines like whites only town. It's definitely provocative.
Yeah, and while that label isn't completely inaccurate, we're going deeper than the headlines today. We're looking at a YouTube video by Wode Maya called No Black People Allowed in South Africa's White-Only Town.
Interesting choice. I think it's really interesting that the creator Wode Maya is actually black himself.
Right, and he approaches Orania with this kind of mix of apprehension, but also a genuine curiosity. Like he really wants to understand.
Yeah, not just there to like point fingers or anything. It seems like he wants to get a clearer picture.
Exactly, and that tension is kind of obvious right from the beginning of the video.
Yeah.
He starts his trip in Cape Town, and as he gets closer to Orania, you can almost feel his anxiety building.
I can see that. Makes sense, though, given how Orania is perceived. It's like this enigma. Yeah, for sure. And he even compares it to a village he went to in Suriname called Dome, where white people aren't allowed. So he's definitely aware of the flip side of this.
Wow, that's a pretty stark comparison. I mean, talk about perspective, right?
Yeah, totally. And then when he finally gets to Orania and starts talking to the people who live there, a very different story starts to come out. They're really proud of their community and what they've built.
Which are the things they emphasize?
A lot of it is about preserving their culture, this desire for self-determination and being free from what they see as too much government control.
That's where it gets complicated, right? They completely reject the label racist
Mhm.
and instead say that Orania is all about celebrating Afrikaner culture.
Yeah, whether you agree with that or not, I think it's really important to understand that difference. They see themselves as a distinct cultural group, not white supremacists.
Right, it's about cultural preservation for them.
Exactly. And it really adds another layer to that whole whites only label. It seems like self-determination is at the heart of it. They want the freedom to shape their own destiny culturally and economically.
It makes you think, though, can that kind of freedom exist when it seems to come at the expense of excluding others?
That's the big question that keeps coming up throughout this whole deep dive. And it's woven into their economic model as well. The video highlights how they've focused on being self-sufficient, almost like a mini nation within South Africa.
Yeah, they've really gone all in on that, haven't they?
Yeah.
Developing their own agriculture with things like double harvests and a solar farm. They even have their own bank and their own currency called the Ora.
It's pretty remarkable. They even have their own manufacturing plant and export goods to support their economy. And they make it very clear that while they do pay taxes to South Africa, they don't take any government funding.
Self-reliance is clearly a core value for them.
Yeah, and that extends to education, too. They've taken a different approach, making Afrikaans their language, the main language in schools.
I remember they were really opposed to what they call Bantu law. They're probably referring to the Bantu Education Act, which was a system of segregation in education during apartheid.
It sounds like they see their system as rejecting that painful past. They put a big emphasis on parents having a choice in their children's education.
So they're really setting themselves apart from the rest of South Africa in how they approach education.
Definitely. They've even got plans to create an Afrikaans university. It really shows how dedicated they are to preserving their language and culture. But how does this dedication to self-reliance actually play out in the way they govern themselves?
Well, their structure is definitely unique. It's like, imagine a town council, but without any political parties. And the elected officials don't even get paid.
That's Orania. They have the power to make their own laws, set their own taxes, and they've even taken on some pretty big infrastructure projects, building new buildings and roads.
Sounds like they thought of everything.
They even have their own ambulance service and a helipad for emergencies. But we can't talk about Orania without talking about its history, particularly in the context of South Africa.
Absolutely, and the video doesn't shy away from that at all. There's this really powerful image in the video of a semicircle of busts honoring these controversial figures from Afrikaner history, including Hendrik Verwoerd.
The architect of apartheid.
Yeah, him. The YouTuber actually straight up asks the Orania residents if this is their way of glorifying apartheid and its legacy. It's a pretty tense moment.
I bet. So what do they say?
Their response is really layered. They say it's important to understand the historical context and that recognizing the past is essential for moving forward. They also say that history isn't simple, and they even compare Verwoerd to Shaka Zulu.
Shaka Zulu, the Zulu leader.
Right, who was also a warrior king.
Oh.
Their point is that judging historical figures isn't so black and white.
I get the whole historical context thing, but I'm still stuck on them choosing to honor Verwoerd. It just feels really insensitive to the people who suffered under apartheid.
It's definitely a point of contention. And speaking of history, we can't ignore the elephant in the room. The land issue. South Africa has this really troubled past when it comes to who owns the land, with huge disparities between white and black ownership.
That's a huge issue. So where do the people of Orania stand on that?
They say that they bought the land fair and square, and it's their home. They don't agree with the argument that they're living on land that should belong to black South Africans.
That's where their argument for self-determination gets really tricky, because it seems like their self-determination is built on historical injustices. It's hard to reconcile those two things.
Incredibly complex. To really understand what's going on, we need to look at how the legacy of apartheid is still shaping South Africa today.
Makes you wonder, though, is it really sustainable in the long term, especially in a world that's so interconnected?
Right. It's like they're trying to create this isolated bubble. And the video actually points out something kind of contradictory. It mentions seeing white domestic workers in Orania.
So they're still relying on outside labor.
It seems that way, which raises questions about just how self-sufficient they really are. If they're aiming for complete independence, why rely on a labor system that looks a lot like the power imbalances of the past?
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a blind spot. And it makes you wonder if true equality is even possible within their system, especially when you consider their stance on immigration.
Oh yeah, how they say anyone can apply for citizenship in Orania as long as they embrace Afrikaner culture.
So you can come in, but you have to conform to their way of life.
They argue that they bought the land legally and that anyone is welcome to join their community, but there's that catch about embracing their culture.
Which seems like a pretty big hurdle for anyone who isn't already part of that culture. It almost feels like a way to keep things homogenous under the guise of choice.
It definitely raises some eyebrows.
Mm-hmm.
It circles back to that bigger question about cultural preservation versus exclusion. Can you really have one without the other?
That's a tough question. And it's not just limited to Orania. We see these same debates about identity, belonging, and immigration happening all over the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like these small, unique communities often reflect these global issues in a really clear way.
Exactly. And speaking of global connections, the video mentions something I found pretty surprising: their reaction to Donald Trump. Apparently, he offered refugee status to Afrikaners a while back.
Yeah, and their response was basically, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want handouts. We want recognition.
It's like they see themselves as this model for the world, a successful community built on self-reliance and shared values.
There's definitely a sense of pride in what they've accomplished, a belief that they've found a formula for success that others can learn from. But of course, the big question is, at what cost? And is it a model that can really be replicated without also replicating its inherent exclusions?
We keep coming back to this tension between self-determination and exclusion. How do they reconcile these two seemingly opposite ideas?
Their argument is that true diversity comes from strong individual identities. They believe that by fiercely protecting their own culture and traditions, they're actually contributing to a more diverse world.
But isn't that kind of a convenient argument? It seems like a way to justify keeping Orania white, and it assumes that everyone has the same opportunity to express their identity and build their own communities, which isn't really the case in a country like South Africa with its history.
You're hitting on the core issue here. Can you really have genuine diversity when the playing field isn't level?
Feels like we keep running into this fundamental tension. It's a fascinating dilemma.
One that really reflects the complexities of South Africa, past and present.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the practical realities of living in Orania. The video shows how they've managed to create a functioning society with its own infrastructure economy, even its own currency. It's pretty impressive in a way.
It is. They've done all of this without government funding, which they make a point of emphasizing. They seem to take real pride in their independence.
Definitely a we'll-do-it-ourselves attitude. Kind of reminds me of the American pioneer spirit, but of course with a very different historical context.
Interesting parallel. It shows how these ideas of self-reliance and frontierism can be adapted and reinterpreted.
Makes you wonder about the long-term sustainability, though. Can a community really isolate itself from the rest of society and still thrive in this day and age?
Good question, especially in a world that's becoming more and more interconnected.
Let's look at some specific examples of their self-sufficiency. They seem really proud of their achievements in agriculture.
Yeah, they talk about getting double harvests through these innovative farming techniques. And of course, there's the solar farm we mentioned, which provides a lot of their energy.
And then there's the aura, their currency. It's like a symbol of their economic independence, but it also feels very insular. Can't really spend it outside of Orania.
Yeah, it keeps the money flowing within their community. They say it strengthens their local economy and creates a sense of shared identity.
But it also limits their interactions with the outside world, which could be seen as both a good and a bad thing.
It depends on what you prioritize, self-sufficiency or integration.
What about their education system? I found their focus on Africans and their plans for university really interesting.
Language is so central to their identity. They see Afrikaans as a cornerstone of their culture and want to pass it down to future generations.
I get that. But it also raises concerns about access and opportunity for people who don't speak Afrikaans. It feels like another barrier.
Yeah, it highlights the challenge of balancing cultural preservation with inclusivity.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's another key element of Orania we need to discuss. Their approach to governance.
Right, a big part of their self-determination. They have their own town council, no political parties, and their elected officials don't get paid. They believe it's a more efficient and community-focused way of doing things.
It's a unique system for sure. Makes you wonder how well it would work with a larger population, though.
Good point. It raises questions about transparency and accountability.
This whole deep dive has really made me think differently about community and identity. Orania is such a complex and contradictory place, full of inspiring things, but also troubling implications.
That's what makes it so fascinating. It shows us that even now, there are communities out there creating their own path, often in ways that challenge our ideas about belonging and progress.
So we've talked about their history, their plans for the future, their economic and social systems, their views on race and culture. What else is there to unpack?
Well, there's one very specific and sensitive issue that we've been kind of dancing around. The whole thing about Hendrik Verwoerd and his bust being featured so prominently in the video.
You're right. We've mentioned him, but haven't really dug into what it means that they choose to honor him.
And it's a decision that a lot of people find deeply troubling, both in South Africa and around the world. It raises questions about historical narratives, reconciliation, and the legacy of apartheid.
Yeah, it's a decision that really needs a closer look. How can they justify honoring someone who's seen by so many as a symbol of racial oppression?
Well, they say that history is complicated, and we shouldn't judge people solely on their worst actions. They think Verwoerd, like anyone from history, needs to be understood in his own context.
But doesn't that feel like a dangerous oversimplification? It's like saying, yeah, he did some bad things, but he also did some good things, so let's just focus on the good. It completely ignores all the suffering caused by apartheid.
It's a perspective that's hard for a lot of people to accept. And it brings a bigger conversation about how societies deal with their difficult pasts. It's a tough balance.
The YouTuber actually challenges them directly on this, asking if they're basically glorifying apartheid by putting up a bust of Verwoerd. And their response is, well, it's something else.
They insist that they're not celebrating apartheid, but acknowledging their history, both the good and the bad. They believe that by facing their past, they can move forward in a positive way.
But that just seems disingenuous to me, especially when they're also denying that Orania is racist. It's like they want to have it both ways.
It's definitely a controversial stance, and one that's going to spark a lot of debate. This leads to another aspect of Orania that I think is worth exploring. The people themselves.
Right. We've talked about all the controversies, the history, the economic system, but what about the people who actually live there? What's it like to be part of this community?
The video gives us a glimpse into daily life in Orania. It shows a peaceful, safe, and community-oriented environment that places a lot of importance on family tradition and hard work.
There's this one scene where the YouTuber is walking around at night and he talks about how safe he feels. He even says you don't see that kind of freedom in other parts of South Africa.
It really shows their sense of security and social cohesion, which they credit to their shared values and their cultural homogeneity.
It makes you think, though, does that security come at a price? Is it only possible because they've created this bubble that shuts out anyone who's different? Is it really freedom if it depends on exclusion?
That gets to the heart of their experiment.
Yeah.
Can true peace and harmony only exist in a homogeneous society?
Such a tough question. And it's one we need to grapple with as we think about the implications of Orania's model. And these questions matter far beyond South Africa.
Absolutely. These debates about diversity, inclusion, and how societies hold together are happening all over the world.
Orania is like a unique case study.
So let's bring it back to our listeners. Why should they care about Orania? What can they learn from this deep dive?
I think Orania gives us a really unique look at self-determination, cultural preservation, and the challenges of building a society based on shared values. It forces us to think about some uncomfortable questions about race history and what it means to belong.
It reminds us that the past isn't really over. It still affects us today in ways we might not even realize.
Yeah. And it highlights how complex identity politics are in our globalized world. As people move around more and connect with each other, questions of cultural preservation and national identity become even more complicated.
Orania is like a miniature version of these global trends, but it's also its own unique experiment. It reminds us that there are other ways to organize society, even if those ways are controversial or challenge our assumptions. It's a call to really engage with those different perspectives, to weigh the pros and cons and see what we can learn both good and bad that might apply to our own communities.
It's like Orania is a mirror reflecting our own hopes, fears, and anxieties about the future. It pushes us to examine our own values and beliefs about identity, community, and what progress really
It
means.
reminds us that creating a just and equitable society is an ongoing process, a process that needs constant dialogue, critical thinking, and a willingness to question how things are.
So, to our listeners, we leave you with this: keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep diving deep,